guess this will be an interesting way to do my homework. I don't think I can share my screen. Huh. Yeah, I don't know what this sounds like because I need is Cardano a shitcoin? That's funny. That's funny. Funny. All right, let's listen to. Let's turn this thing off. Power off. You know, wireless headphones are cool, but
around the world. One of the things, just to give you an example, was there were some institutions that they clearly, for whatever reason, had targeted as
pain in the ass. Pardon and
in this, they had personal profiles of even just secretaries in these institutions. So it's clearly not just we're going to keep a record of the CEO of a key company. The president of a country, a general, that type of information. But it's clearly hoovering up information of places that they want to target down to very low levels within an organization.
So Kingdom Trust says additional information. Kingdom Trust may receive compensation in the form of 12B1 fees and other types of fees for certain investments or their affiliates in consideration of services that it provides to an asset. This compensation will be paid to Kingdom Trust based on a service agreement between that entity, Kingdom Trust, and Kingdom Trust. Hold on. Let me read this again. It says this. I wish I could share the screen, but I'm talking to myself again. This compensation will be paid to Kingdom Trust based on a service agreement between that Am I going bonkers here? Am I going bonkers? Does anyone find that medication work? Yes. So weird. Anyway, this compensation will be paid to Kingdom Trust based on a service agreement. podcast. Whew. That would make my mother trucking day. Because literally, I have zero time to eat, and zero time to work after I come home after I've been working. So it's like, when the hell am I supposed to get anything done? Well, Brady, you could always not go to work. Maybe that would work. Does anyone read the fine print anymore? Or is this just the old out one pocket, on into the other? Should I say other? Anyone read the fine print anymore? Replacing that. Nor did that. That's so weird. Doing quotes on a keyboard with the left hand, not so easy. All right, replacing that, excuse yourself. Or do I say another? Replacing that with this compensation will be paid to Kingdom Trust based on the service agreement between an entity to get interesting. Does anyone read the fine print anymore, or is this just the old out one pocket and into the other? Or do I say or is this just the old out one pocket and into the other? Or do I say into another? Singing that song outside and it's driving me insane. Oh, mukbang. I love rhyming. It's such a useless skill unless you dedicate hours of your freaking life. You dedicate hours of your life to it.
One of the things that caught my
to make it
attention
unique.
Came up in an article to reference this was
Like
some
a
of the language
paintbrush.
used by this company. And one line in particular caught my attention.
Not skilled.
It's a direct quote from the article, but
Not good, because anyone can paint a likeness of anything, but unique. That, my friends, is the challenge.
And that's an extraordinary recruiting line, right? It's, to me, that is so transparent and so concerning in its underlying character. And yes, we all know that the CIA has conducted operations in minor countries, but this is occurring on a broad scale, as I mentioned, across Australia, the UK, the United States. India, in particular, was targeted, obviously not on a population basis, but on a proportionate basis. It was very important. Vietnam, for example, you mentioned there's key individuals there, so this is really an extraordinary effort that was underway.
Place
yeah, and I think one of the things that is not quite understood is I'm sure that people like Xi or Vladimir Putin probably have their preferred candidates that they would rather deal with. But I think one thing that gets lost in this conversation about who China, Russia, or other countries might prefer as the leader of the U.S. or other countries is what they really want to accomplish is to stir up chaos, dissension, and distrust in the entire system of democracy. So like when we hear like Chinese media talk about Corona and things like that, what they're talking about is, look, China did it better than democracies. This is the new way. And so, yes, I don't doubt that Xi or people like Putin have their preferred candidate, but the real target is sowing doubt and dissension about the entire system.
Yeah, I think that's very clear, and I've been very publicly on record in terms of speaking about the strength of the American system from both a geographic standpoint, in terms of our unique situation, basically controlling our own island. The way you defeat us is causing dissension. We have to break apart internally for any real threat. So let's actually switch seats for a second and put on the American in Vietnam, similar to the American in Paris, watching from afar and seeing what you're seeing. Are they succeeding?
I mean, so I'll be honest in saying, not having really lived in the United States for 11 years, but still having very close ties with friends and family here, as kind of an outsider, I mean, it really appears that they are. And when I hear about, when I see on social media and read newspaper articles about the vitriol arguments and dissension taking place, you just kind of want to, throw up your hands and roll your eyes and say, I mean, is this really the hill that we're going to die on? And so it is kind of amazing to watch how vitriolic these arguments have gotten, how the dissension and distrust that has been sown. I mean, it is kind of disappointing. And I consider myself, in philosophical terms, the type of libertarian in the sense that the government should stay out of the bedroom and the wallet in general terms. But I think if you look at a lot of the debates that are taking place in America, people are dying on rhetorical hills, and everything is the end of the world. Everything is the end of democracy, and it's really sad to see in a lot of things.
So, as you come back here, and as you re-enter America as an outsider who's been away for 11 years, what would you see, or what do you see as ways that we can do a better job of being aware of how we're being manipulators, or how databases like this are influencing the discussion? Do you think these databases, I mean, is ultimately the arguments that are being put into social media, per the quote that I gave,
penis?
In reality, how do we step away from that? How do we gain the perspective of
someone? Who the fuck was in here?
3,500 miles away across an ocean.
So I think that there are a couple of things. One of the things is that we know that Russia, we know China, other countries, and just as a quick side note, we know for a fact that Huawei and China are doing a lot of cooperation on cyber information warfare type of activities. They're actually cooperating quite significantly. But back to the question, one of the things is that I would say is I think it's really important to turn down the rhetoric. And I'll just give you one of my personal pet peeves is every day there is talk about the democracy in America is okay, and I hear this argument having lived in authoritarian countries for the past 11 years and surrounded by authoritarian or mostly authoritarian countries, not entirely democratic countries, and I just kind of laugh at that notion. I'll just give you an example. I mean, what authoritarian country impeaches their president? I mean, that's kind of nonsensical. Now, I think there's reasonable debates about the behavior that President Trump engaged in. There are. President Trump has lost frequently in the courts. He's won in the courts. Okay. Authoritarian governments, authoritarian leaders don't get impeached. Authoritarian leaders don't lose in the courts. So again, we can have these debates about the behavior he engaged in. We can have these debates about about the use of executive authority. Those are all valid debates. We had those debates in the Obama administration. Obama won. He lost in the courts. I think it is rhetorical flourish, and I think it's designed to engender impassioned responses about politics, about party, about leadership when we talk about things in that way, rather than saying, okay, what are the actual issues at play? And we immediately jump to charges like, well, democracy is it's an authoritarian state. I mean, if every authoritarian state was this authoritarian, the world would be a lot better place.
No, I think that's actually important. The way I try to frame it for my family, as they view social media and they view information, so I always say to them, why don't ask what you're seeing, or if it is true even, ask why you're seeing it, why it is being presented to you. And I would also encourage people, and this is hard for me as well, I'm obviously quite active on social media, step away from the social media itself and actually try to...
All right. So that sentence doesn't sit right with me. And then it goes on to say, in no case will and they use uppercase A, account holder, so uppercase A and H. So in no case will the account holder, which I imagine they give a description of, as a term, what that means. So I'm sure it's defined somewhere. Account holder be responsible for the payment of this compensation. The compensation paid to Kingdom Trust will be based on either, here we go, ladies and gentlemen, and put your suspenders on, please, because we're going for a ride. Call that a 5-point seatbelt. It is based on either a set rate per account holder, again, capital case. That's what I'll call it, capital case, not capital letters or uppercase, like capital case. Will be based on either a set rate per account holder, capital case, or based on the percentage of the average daily net. And here's where they really shove it in lowercase so you can't see it, but you'll feel it. Or based on a percentage of the average daily net asset value of shares invested. Boom! And I bet you $20 that in their definition of shares, and I could be totally wrong because I haven't read it yet, but what if they called digital assets shares just like stock shares? And there was no differentiation. Ooh. They are just hooking up to your digital assets and selling them to the highest bidder. Whether that's themselves on option markets, I don't like. Sorry, I'm eating, but freaking hungry and I don't have time to do this. And why it's on here? Forcing myself to study. In no case will the account holder be responsible for the payment. So the account holder isn't going to be responsible because Kingdom Trust has taken it upon themselves to take the account holder's percentage, average daily net asset values of shares invested. Ooh. Should fees go unpaid, please note that Kingdom Trust reserves the right to liquidate any assets. I don't think they would do, but they could do without notice for the outstanding balance. Kingdom Trust reserves the right to charge additional amounts for certain requests. They clarify there with certain, so I'm assuming their certain might not meet the terms and conditions of your definition of certain. If there's anything I learned reading, oh my gosh, I used to ride the train. I used to take the train to work every day. I don't know if I remember carrying a Black's Law dictionary around, but I remember buying it and being utterly fascinated with the disgusting way in which we've perverted how we define words, put it that way. From a contractual standpoint, the way in which words are deemed fit for contract because these words mean things, and if you're using the word for a particular reason, you're doing so for a particular reason. It's as simple as it gets. He who has the highest lawyer count can charge the most to freaking twisted language, excuse my language, bluster cluck around everything so it can be legal, but they're just, they revised this 9/19 of last year. Got this, and they got the balls to say this. Kingdom Trust does not provide tax, legal, or investment advice. Because if you did, you'd say, steer the clear of me. It does not endorse or recommend any agent, company, or specific investment. Any information communicated by Kingdom Trust is solely for educational purposes and should not be considered as tax, legal, or investment advice. Let me just click those 3 numbers off. Consultations with tax, legal, and investment professionals is advised prior to making any decisions regarding your account. Man. They really do a number on you there.
Connect with people, right? Are you able to have a
Back to eating.
Or you recognize how hostile your behavior, if you spoke to people the way that you do on social media, would be interpreted in a face-to-face interaction. And again, that's probably one of the dynamics of coronavirus, right? It's almost, you could argue that the behavior
Dude, Mike Green,
and the choices that were made.
Mike Green hit the nail on the head right there. I cannot wait for fucking someone to show up. It doesn't matter what I was going to say because no one's listening.
Fit a lot of the characteristics, a lot of the designations that we're referring to in terms of designed to separate us, designed to cause chaos and discord. And so I encourage people just to stop and say, why am I being fed this? Why is it eliciting this reaction to me? And is that the reaction that I want to have in response to this?
And I'll also tell you, just as an example, one of the things what was very interesting to me was, when you live in a foreign country, you're frequently asked about, especially as an American, you're asked about the politics of the United States. And, it's always very interesting. One of the things that, I would tell a lot of Americans is, and Vietnam is somewhat of an outlier. But, to be honest, Trump is, I think, quite popular in Vietnam. And there's a lot of complex reasons for that. There's overlapping reasons for that. But when you have to answer questions from people about specific policy issues, why is he doing that? Who do you think is going to do this type of stuff? And you're trying to talk to somebody who's somewhat of an outsider. You have to explain it almost in a nonpartisan. You're trying to explain something in a nonpartisan way. You have to think about issues in different ways. And and a lot of times they have an almost mechanical understanding of the United States, not having lived there. So in some ways, they actually know the system of government, which powers are delegated to which authorities better, though they may not understand the personalities as well. And so it definitely helps you work through those issues as to why you're being asked, why people have opinions the way they do when they're outsiders rather than having lived and grown up in that environment.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I actually think that is similar to what we were talking about before, just the ability to disassociate a little bit and think about what is the system in place and how you can approach that. When we think about the narrative that we're receiving, you mentioned that China has been focused on spreading a narrative that they did a better job of coronavirus and that this is a better path, right? That's reminiscent of communications that we received during the Great Depression, for example, that the communist path was the better path, right? The Soviets were managing themselves better. And of course, we heard that at the exact same time that they were executing their own people in various purges, that there was starvation occurring on a wide scale. So the data sets, the information that we receive, particularly as Americans, is often very poorly, because we're so far away, even in today's world of virtual transparency. When you deal with a country like China, what comes out is very rarely anti-state, right? You need to incorporate a perspective of a filter that is being applied. What do you think is actually happening in China now? What has changed in China over the past couple of years, particularly as it relates to what I would anticipate is a significant deterioration in their economy based on the dynamics of the global slowdown tied to coronavirus? As a country that has been the manufacturer of the world in an environment in which there's been a massive global slowdown, what do you think is going on? What are you hearing?
So I think there's so many layers to that question. Yep. So let me try and make sure that I hit all of them. One of the things is that I do think there is, let's say, a significant degree of nationalism in the country. It seems almost like they're trying to both gin up the nationalism and also restrain it at the same time, in the sense with regards to Hong Kong. One of the things I think that is poorly understood, for instance, just to take Hong Kong as an example, the populace in China generally viewed Hong Kong as the spoiled child of the kind of broader Chinese family. And one of the things is that they always wondered, why would Hong Kongers protest to defend freedom of speech? That to the average man on the street in China, that honestly just doesn't make sense. And the way to describe it is almost like, well, how do you explain 3 dimensions to someone who's only ever lived in 2 dimensions? It just doesn't make sense. Well, we're growing, we're a big country. Yeah, you're gonna get with the program. This is how it works. And I think you're seeing a similar dynamic. I think on play with Taiwan. There was a op-ed recently in the Global Times, which is a very nationalistic paper, that it was talking openly about war with Taiwan. And I think what was noticeable there was they were almost trying to restrain. It almost sounded like they were trying to restrain the forces in China that were urging war with Taiwan. Go invade Taiwan now. And I think that's an undercurrent. I think a lot of people significantly underestimate some type of conflict with Taiwan in the next, let's say, 2 years. And when we say conflict, that could mean everything from full-scale invasion to, a blockade to some type of, boat disaster or something like that. There's any number of things that could specifically mean. So I do think politically and externally, there's a lot of issues. You see it in India with the China-India border skirmish. There's a lot of issues like that I think they're trying to both push forward and restrain from becoming too large.
All right.
Domestically, I think Xi is, there's a lot of pressure on Xi because I think at least within a lot of upper echelons, I think there's a lot of grumbling, but I think
that
no
being
one
said,
is willing to actually do anything for many reasons. I remember even before I left, there was
if you take
and people within the party seemed very scared, very concerned.
the
Let's put it this way: if you told me tomorrow that
$30
had been poisoned and was dead,
a month fee they charge,
20 years,
that's like
Yeah, I want to push on that actually for a second because I think that's actually
360,
point, right? Which and it plays into a theme that I talk a lot about in investing.
if you look at all these fees,
powerful, and they're also incredibly fragile, right? So, and
this actually might be the cheaper option.
Which creates its own dynamic of push and pull, right? You foment nationalism because you want to garner.
But they might be selling your.
The great leader often recognizes that if the forces of nationalism escape, that he can no longer control them and it can be forced to.
Imagine having a stable of horses.
For him personally, or her personally, that tends to elude people when they think about this, idea
And
of permanent leadership. So what I'm hearing
in exchange for someone taking care of them,
very robust, and it goes again to the language that is used, right? Reform.
they were like, yeah, you can use it, but don't like disappear on me. Don't steal it. Just bring it back at night.
Anti-China is
wow.
betrayal, and you're a traitor to the country, and the forces of corruption have tied you up, and we're going to execute you as
Imagine that.
Corrupt individual, right? That's easily accepted. That language is easily accepted. But exactly as you're describing, there's also some rumblings because Xi has extended China in a way, trying to push itself forward on the global stage, and this has made it relatively easy for the U.S. administration under Trump to be.
Anyway, let's go back.
A coalition of resistance to Xi in a way that hadn't existed, right? Certainly under the Obama administration, and I'm very apolitical on this. I want to be very clear, but I tend to be somewhat of a single issue individual right now because I think the threat from China, if unchecked, is so important. And I would just highlight that while people are very focused on this, in particular, where you hear negative language from Europeans, you mentioned that.
Oh, that's right.
In part, that's because they're sitting in the shadow of the thing, right? They see it firsthand.
You know why I hate doing these?
Interpretations on the differences. Those who are directly in China's environment, the Taiwans, the Singapores, the Vietnamese, etc., are Koreans, are perhaps more positively opposed to the behaviors that we're seeing coming out of the Trump administration than those who are protected by Russia, for example, just in terms of physical distance.
Yes, I think that's actually a very reasonable interpretation. And when you talk about, like, let's
just
say,
bullshit.
To Southeast Asia, all of those countries have their own complexities. But
these IRA things are basically companies that
assessment because they
have quote
China as a much bigger threat.
Show
than they do the United States.
They've displayed that they can be
this doesn't mean that they're all fans of Trump. This doesn't mean that they all love the
good little boys and girls inside the candy shop.
Leadership within the country, within the military, things like that across all those countries. They absolutely, I think, very fairly say. I think
the irony is
China as a much bigger risk.
The government can't.
They're going
to. It's like, here's something that's really good. You don't have to pay taxes on stuff later. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so good. You have to do it. Every financial advisor is like, you're an idiot if you're not doing a Roth IRA, or at least to a parent. Hey, if you didn't, teach your kid the valuable lesson of starting a Roth IRA when they were 18, ... fill in the blank, whatever you want to say. Anyway, it's just ironic that not the reason, but it sure does pay to be the government, but I guess they're not getting paid, but they are because it's taxes, because it's business tax. So the companies like this that hold our assets are going to be literally trading them essentially. I mean, this one, oh crap, now we're on custodial agreement and disclosure statement. All right. Does anyone hear? Shit. Fees and disclosures. All right, let's go back to life. I hate that when you're actually trying to do something and then you just are interrupted by a song you remember. Kingdom Trust. What's the other one? iTrust. I trust capital, or do I? Dun, dun, dun. Anyway. So question is pricing. See how nice they are there? Crypto, 1% trade fee, gold $50 over spot, silver $2.50 over spot per ounce, and a $29.95 monthly account fee. Your monthly account fee includes, everything they already do for free? Yes. Well, maybe not the support and maintenance. Setup of your new IRA, facilitation of transfer rollover contribution, blah, 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 really easy. And the government gets to give us. Our government now gives me the money it's convinced you to store away safe for a later date without having to pay taxes on it. It's really fucking government. They've figured out how to incentive. Like Peter says, it really grinds my gears. Ultimate storage, unlimited storage with institutional unlimited. Right, your warehouse now. iTrust Capital Platform support and maintenance. So Bitcoin, Litecoin, XRP, Chainlink coming soon. Oh, that's disturbing. iTrust. iTrust, I'm gonna have to put you on blast for that. iTrust, I'm gonna have to put you on blast. Out of the cryptos you have for adding Chainlink for Cardano. What the actual fuck? Yeah, maybe I don't trust you. Sucker! Peace. So, Chainlink, gold, oof. Chainlink. So they have $1,000 minimum additional contribution, $1,000, so you can't contribute anything less. Knowledge Center. Let's go to the Knowledge Center. Bitcoin, let's just go straight to the categories. Category 1. Oh, I want more of that. Chicken is toasty.
sucks to think that there are people outside aren't going to a home where they can eat leftovers at night. I think we sometimes forget that. He says as he houses another piece of chicken. I sing way too much to myself. How to avoid a crypto tax tsunami? There's an old saying. It's not what you make, it's what you keep. 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Crypto traders, people go. Dude, I want to be the world's wealthiest mukbanger. Is that even possible? That's a Pollyanna goal of life, or whatever Yankee swap. So, how to avoid the crypto tax tsunami? Crypto traders love the opportunities the cryptocurrency market provides, mainly due to its volatility. What traders don't love, or anyone else for that matter, is paying taxes on their gains. Not to mention the complexity of tracking all their trades. Not anymore. Strike that for many of your future conversations. Because it's actually really easy now. In fact, there are companies out there that are going to not only tax arbitrage the crap out of you, but the companies let you tax arbitrage the shit out of yourself. I highly recommend it. Once again, that government really knows how to be a real sack of dickheads. Anyway, I digress. 1 step back. You're welcome. Everyone knows we have to pay taxes, but to have to pay the IRS short-term capital gains on all the trades not held for at least 1 year is steep. So the IRS taxes these types of gains as regular income. So depending on what your tax bracket in the state you live in could be, they forgot, could be taxed upwards of 50%. What that also does, other than the feeling of being gut punched, is it drastically reduces your available funds to trade with and build more wealth. Every year you have to hand over a large chunk of your money and work on rebuilding it to give more away next year. Ain't that the truth? You know, what does the world's highest ranking, the wealthiest mukbanger, I'm telling you, homework and chicken are great. Oh. Because I'm eating, I'm going to play this.
To work with the United States, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, whether it's Obama Jr., they're going to work with the United States in different ways that kind of fit their overall preferences. But they absolutely do view China as the bigger risk. Vietnam, as an example, Vietnam is actually surprisingly, I did not realize this, Vietnam is probably the most pro-United States country literally in the world. And this is not just a broad sentiment, but it is a deeply and strongly held sentiment. And this is true over a long period of time. And as an American, I went to Vietnam and I was like, well, everything I've ever seen was Ken Burns documentaries growing up. And you go there, and there's actually deep love. And America is incredibly popular in Vietnam.
Don't be left in the dark when planning for the future of your business. Partner with the bank used by 50% of U.S.-based venture-backed tech and life science companies.
Blah, blah.
Silicon Valley Bank.
Now, the government, they want to work with the United States, especially in areas like the South China Sea. They also don't want to become beholden to the United States. So in things like infrastructure projects like ports, they try to say, we're going to give this part to the Japanese, we're going to give this part to the French, we're going to work with the Americans here, and yeah, we'll probably have a Chinese construction company maybe involved or something like that. So they're absolutely hedging, but they absolutely at the same time view China as the greater risk and say, we want more friends that will help us as a bulwark against China. And so the challenge for the United States, whether it's Trump, whether it's Biden, is to say, how do we work with countries in unique ways to deal with China? Because I very much have a similar thought, that people ask me, why are you so concerned about China? It's not crazy at this point in history, in my opinion, to say China could usher in a period of 200 to 500 years of global authoritarianism. They're clearly trying to do that in a lot of Western developed countries supporting authoritarians. So I don't think that's a crazy scenario.
So I unfortunately agree with that. I think it would probably be less of a time period. And ironically, I'm a little bit more concerned about how the U.S. responds to the authoritarian response, right? So we've been through this in the last 100 years, where we had a similar dynamic with the Soviet Union, where we chose to take a somewhat principled stance of how do you respond to an authoritarian power by embracing the diversity of a democracy. And I've been recommending people read Matt Stoller's book, Goliath, to think about the 180-degree view of the actions of FDR and those who followed them relative to the way that an Andy Schleys might have presented it in The Forgotten Man, right? So there's a story in terms of a reduction of corporatism that I think is very important to understand this dynamic. But I think the biggest risk that I see in the United States is actually that we respond to this challenge by becoming more authoritarian ourselves. And so I think that's part of the subtext that you're actually referring to as well. You're saying it's not necessarily that China would capture those areas and become the dominant force. It's that in the response, America becomes more authoritarian in itself. Is that a reasonable interpretation of what you're saying?
Yes, I think it is definitely. Just to give you a couple of examples, like when you use the Cold War analogy, one of the things, just to give you two specific challenges, is a lot of people are saying, well, we need to work with Europe and things like that, and we do. At the same time, a lot of the Cold War institutions that we think of, for different reasons, for primarily technical reasons, they simply aren't going to work when we're talking about China. Okay. We're talking about a different theater. I mean, literally on the other side of the world. We're talking about a bunch of governments in Asia that have all kinds of different government structures. Okay, even democracies. The South Korean government is going to operate very differently than the Indian government for a lot of reasons. So we need to think, I think much more creatively internationally how this works. And when we talk about that, how that works domestically, I think what is
when someone describes the global,
these are difficult conversations. And
like national arenas. It's basically Chinese were here first, or the Chinese technology advanced the furthest. Oh no, I'm trying to link Lucy to Chinese people, or the what's it called? The Descendants, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, back to the show.
Nuance, there's complexity. Just to give you one example of this, I'm a big believer in international education. Okay, that's really been most of my professional career. Working in China, working in Vietnam as a professor. That's very important to me. I'm a big fan of that. At the same time, allowing Chinese graduate students from the PLA into American research labs, to me, is probably a risk that we need to seriously reconsider. And the Trump administration has said we're not going to allow that. And so how do we say these are acceptable risks, these are valid risks, and put that through some type of vetting process to make sure that that we are saying, hey, China wants to use our strengths of openness against us. So how do we remain open? How do we remain a liberal democracy, but also recognize that China's trying to use those strengths as weaknesses against us? And we just need to be very cognizant of those debates. And so that's why when we get back to this idea of information warfare, what they're trying to do is sow discord so that we're not saying, what's a reasonable trade-off here? How do we manage these specific issues?
I think that's really well said. And I think it goes, again, to kind of my core fear that we will choose to react too late and then have to effectively institute a very aggressive policy, right? And so to me, it's very clear on stuff like this. If when you're talking about it, you want to make sure that you are aware of the potential to frame something in the context of racism, right? Are you reacting because somebody is Chinese, or are you reacting, or ethnically Chinese, or are you reacting because of the risk that they represent from a national security standpoint, right? And to think about it in that matrix, I think is really important. And unfortunately, the forces inside the United States on both sides, right? So in both situations, have reacted, from actions to immediately point and say, oh, this is authoritarian in the case of shutting down transportation between the United States and China under the Trump administration as related to coronavirus, or cutting back on the ability for Chinese students to attend university in the United States. These are often interpreted as authoritarian actions. It's not at all clear that that's the right lens to apply them, right? We need to be cognizant of those two battles. The second thing, I think you mentioned Europe, right? And so I would challenge our European listeners to put this in the context of exactly what you described, the difference between the Cold War between Russia and the United States, where Europe was effectively a peninsula trapped in between the two, right? And so the U.S. emphasis on putting troops on the ground in Europe, encouraging the defense of Europe, the attention that was paid to Europe was very necessary. And of course, on the other side of the globe, we had less capacity to do that because we didn't have the relationships, we didn't have those ties. And so violence broke out in Southeast Asia and more broadly across that region, right? Today, we're almost in the opposite scenario, where Europe largely feels secure because of a weakened Russia or Soviet sphere. And as a result, they're playing, at least from my perspective, Europe is playing a kind of interesting game where they enjoy the fact that China is tweaking the United States, that China is challenging the United States. This feels positive because it allows Europe to be in a position of relative influence where it can treat the United States and China as potential equals, where they're bartering with both, right? What's the risk to Europe in doing that? One, does that seem like a fair assessment? And two, how should we think about this if you are a European? How should you think about interpreting the challenges that the U.S. is facing in terms of trying to thwart the actions of China in Asia in particular, from the perspective of the European? Look at Merkel, for example, right, with Germany, which has very strong and deep supply chains with China, and is very much resisting any attempts to exclude China from the dynamics of a true globalist situation.
So the way I always try to cast the debate is if I was to describe an action to you with essentially no name attached, would you think that's a good or a bad action? Okay, and if we apply that same basic idea to China, if I was to say let's not consider it against the United States, let's just say this is what China is doing. Is that good or bad, and how should you react? I think a lot of times, a lot of people take the type of approach that you said and said, well, compared to the United States, we're in between, something like that, rather than saying this is what is taking place. How do I respond based upon the absolute description of what is taking place? And so, just as an example, if you were to say, well, the United States is going to suck up every piece of data about every European, that would clearly be problematic. That's why they did things like GDPR to localize data. Collection on Europeans. Google has to abide by European law and erase data, localize data storage for Europeans, things like that. But when it comes to China, for instance, for some reason with Huawei, nobody cares about it. Okay, and so the best way to think about it is this good? Is this right? Regardless of who does it. Regardless of who does it. And so I think that is the place to start, especially for Europeans. That it's like, instead of saying let's have a China standard, what is the standard that we expect to exist, and then is China meeting that standard? And I think that's a much better way to think about it than relative to this, compared to this country, et cetera, and say, is China meeting the standard that we expect a global corporation, a developed country to treat their citizens and to treat foreign citizens?
Yeah, I think that's, colloquially, that's known as whataboutism, right? So, China's doing this, well, what about what America does, right? I think your standard is quite a good one, which is just say, is this acceptable behavior? Does this meet my standards, right? Forget the realpolitik for a second and say, does this meet my standards? I think that's a pretty reasonable way to look at it. Let's veer for a second. Do you have much of a perspective on the relationship between Russia and China?
So Russia and China most definitely have a frenemy type of relationship. They absolutely cooperate quite deeply in some areas, and they absolutely are maybe not hardened enemies, but they definitely are enemies in other areas. Just to give you an idea, we know that Huawei is hiring Russian hackers and hiring Chinese hackers to move to Moscow. Okay, and they're recruiting in the hacker community all throughout Eastern Europe. That's definitely a concerning behavior, and we know that other Chinese companies are doing it. There's cooperation in those areas. We also know, however, that there are certain areas where they are enemies. In the South China Sea, Vietnam actually hired a Russian oil and gas firm to help them drill for oil, basically knowing that China would not, take provocative actions against a Russian shipping and drilling. Okay, and Russia had no problems doing that. Okay, so there's definitely times, and Russia has played that role in India as well. So it's a very interesting and unique relationship. I don't know of any other geopolitical relationship.
And we're back. So they've basically been talking about how great 2017 was until it wasn't. The U.S. tax system works off each calendar year, and although you can push investment losses forward against future gains, you cannot apply losses to previous gains. Damn, so that hurt. I, however, was not involved in that. Luckily. What's worse is that because so many moves were made during the madness, we just
read that. Short-term capital gains rates and brackets. %22. 24%. Huh. 82.50. So the head of household, if your salary's under 82, $82,500. If it's under that, then you're 22%. And if you're single, 82,500 also. But if you're single, it's not so good. Head of house gets 51,801 versus if you're single, you go all the way down to 38,700. Anyway, long-term capital gains. So 15% for most people, unless you make over $425,000. That's sort of a lot. Tracking trades. Tracking trades is nothing new to traders. Keeping track of gains and losses is standard and generally pretty easy in the traditional world of investing. It's not quite as easy when it comes to crypto trading. Sure it is, just get the right software. Or a company. Have the use what do they call it? I don't remember. Not that I can recall. Nope. IRS has categorized cryptocurrency as property for tax purposes, so this means gains and losses have to be reported as capital gains, no different than stocks and real estate. It gets a bit more complicated with crypto because these are the basics of what is and what is not a taxable event. I'm trying to do my best impression of David Attenborough. Sucks though. Trading cryptocurrencies to US dollars is a taxable event. Trading cryptocurrency to cryptocurrency is a taxable event. Using cryptocurrency to buy goods and services is a taxable event. A wallet-to-wallet transfer is not a taxable event. USD to cryptocurrency is not a taxable event. But you do need to keep good records of the original paper. Dude, they will... The Achilles heel of the United States government is its need to keep records. Seriously, if you could, well, I guess records on themselves is now what's coming out. Anyway, I digress. That's right. No one's listening. And we're almost an hour in. I think we've recorded this to the ethos. Anyway, Even though not every move is a taxable event, you still need to keep track of every move to figure out your cost basis for each investment. In most cases, there are fees when you transfer crypto from one place to another. There are several companies that have developed software to track all of these moves for taxes, which is all but necessary to accurately report gains, losses on your taxes. For traders that have not been keeping good records, some for years, the IRS does not show any mercy. If audited, you have to provide evidence of your original cost basis and how you arrived to your gains and loss figures. If evidence cannot be provided that a zero cost basis can be applied to all of your crypto assets and taxed on the full amount of your holdings. If that is bad enough, penalties and interest can be assessed for inaccurate filing and late payment. Freaking IRS basically has you by the, excuse my language, but fucking cock and balls and everything else. What about not filing? Many people think that because crypto is supposed to be anonymous and the government will never know who they are, simply won't file. This strategy may have worked for a while, but with the growth of the crypto market and the number of gains being made, the IRS is increasing its efforts. The tax man cometh. Coinbase has already been forced to surrender the NIF. They went out of their way. They literally went out of their way to offer records of anyone who had transactions over $20,000. So on their platform, yeah. With all transactions being ledgered on public blockchains, all that needs to be done is match wallet addresses with names. In the future, software will be deployed, if it hasn't already, to figure out who owns what. Which kind of is a bummer, but is it? I don't know. I think I'm still in the in-betweener phase, I guess you could call it. Hard cap, like I said. Hard cap. IRAs have existed since the mid-70s when they were created to provide employees of companies. So the 40s, 50s, and 60s were like, yeah, companies raking in profits. Wee-hoo, money, money. And then the government was like, oh shit. Everyone sees that and is like, hey, wait a minute, they're making all that money. What about us? Oh, yeah, here's a basket you can get your shit tax free through. You're welcome. I tell you, these freaking government actors are real pleasant people. IRAs have existed in the 1970s. Oh, the mid-70s. I guess that's when shit was really fucking disgusting in New York City. Oh, look at that. 10/08. 10/8. 2020. You sack of punta. That sucked. I was trying to take a picture of it, and then of course it turns to 10:09. Crap, I'll have to do it tomorrow at 10:09. And then I can say, yeah. I got the picture. IRAs were an instant hit. No shit. Here, oh my gosh. $1.4 billion in the first year, 1975, with contribution rising quickly. They hit $4.8 billion in 1981. Many additions to IRAs have been added over the years. The 1978 Act. The 1978 Revenue Act implied the simplified employees' pension, which provided small businesses owners to contribute. Yeah. Oh, let me get up to the government feed bag and stick my tap into its wooden bucket. The Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 allowed for IRAs to become universally available as a savings incentive to all workers. The Tax Recovery Act. Oh, the Economic Recovery Tax Act. What the hell happened in Economic Recovery? That sounds like our government. Oh, that's right. It's the same one, 1981. Same shit, different stall. Allowed for IRAs to become universally available as a savings incentive to all workers. Give us your money and let us gamble with it. Really? What about those that don't? Can we not participate and not get taxed on our gains? Dicks. Gosh, Tina, eat your ham. Seriously. To all workers in 1991. Oh, I bet there was some Workers' Relief Act too. Provisions were made to allow for special purpose distributions without the 10% early withdrawal penalty. I have a special purpose. Please don't tax me. There's a frickin' copters out there. My favorite addition came in 1997 with the Roth IRA was introduced, which allows for non-taxable distributions. I like this one. I will discuss this in more detail later. Dang it, I want to hear it now. Oh, so they go down the different kinds. See, this is education. What is this called? Oh, this is their article. Durr. What about not filing? Little IRA for your reading pleasure. More detail later. Another important addition to note is the 2001 economic growth. Dude, was it not just the 1978 Revenue Act? Oh no, sorry, I mean the Economic Recovery Tax Act. Oh wait, did that not come out right? Is this 97? No, this is 2001. Yeah. Economic Growth and Tax Relief Reconciliation Act? Are you fucking kidding me? Have we become, oh my gosh. Have we been asleep at the wheel for this long? This bugs the shit out of me. Sorry, folks. Other important additions to note is the 2001 Economic Growth and Tax Relief Reconciliation Act, which increased contribution limits and added a catch-up provision for taxpayers over the age of... Because they got fucking pissed that you jerked them around to get them to go into fucking 1981 and 78, and now they're... They're like, you were holding my assets. The market took a fucking dump, and you went with it. I don't want you to hold my money. Well, here's a way you can do it, which increases contribution limits, and we can add a catch-up provision for taxpayers over 50. Oh my gosh. Which just goes further. More confirmation, next paragraph. The Consumer Protection Act. Ladies and gentlemen, this is embarrassing to read this. How do we not see this? I have no idea. This is going to be a tweet. I was going to say. IRAs are an instant hit, and they garnered $1.4 billion in the first year. I'm going to take this one. Away those. Next one, 8. Copy. Doesn't need to be that picky when I cut and paste my copies, but it does look better. Economic Recovery Act of 1981. Special fucking purpose distributions. Special purpose. Special purpose. I like this. Don't know why. 1992 special purpose provisions. And my favorite, 1997. God, I remember that. Why don't you put in a Roth IRA? I mean, yes, it's a good idea, but it's also like, hey, honey, this is the tax man. He's going to rape you for the rest of your life for all your money. I think it would be great if you just gave it all to him as quickly as possible. Okay? Now run along, little Jimmy. Seriously. 1997. No. Roth IRA. They just sucked even more.
You can't make this up, folks. This, you can't make this up. I would don't. Oh, hour 22. I'm gonna go. I would love to see that. Love to see it. Mm. All right, folks. Well, thanks to you future folks.